Rich gun owners are making calls to dealers right now, and they all want the same thing: fast, quiet sales. Guns that cost $50,000 are moving for half that. Here are the real reasons wealthy collectors are letting go of their most prized weapons. Number 10. Start with the paperwork nobody wants to inherit. A custom gun collection is not like a car or a painting. You cannot just hand it to your kids in a will and walk away from it. Federal law treats certain firearms like landmines buried inside an estate. Suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and other regulated pieces need special transfers, background checks, and sometimes months of waiting before a new owner can legally take possession. If a family member gets even one step wrong, they can face serious criminal charges for owning a weapon they did not even know was illegal to hold onto without the right paperwork. Estate lawyers now spend hours just untangling gun collections before they can even touch the rest of an estate. They have to identify every regulated piece, confirm every registration, and figure out whether each item can legally pass to the person named in the will, or whether it needs a special trust set up years in advance just to move safely. Some states add their own extra rules on top of the federal ones, which means a collection built in one state can create legal problems the moment it crosses into another, especially if an heir lives somewhere with stricter laws than where the collection was originally kept. Executors handling these estates often have to freeze the entire firearms portion of an inheritance until every piece is sorted, which can delay the rest of the estate from closing for months. Wealthy owners who built these collections over decades are hearing the same advice from their own lawyers again and again. Sell the collection now while you can still control the process and pick the buyer, instead of leaving a tangled mess for your children to sort out after you are gone. That single piece of advice, repeated in law offices across the country, has pushed more high-dollar collections onto the market in the last year than almost any other single reason on this list. Number 9. Next comes a tax change that flipped the entire secondary market upside down overnight. For 90 years, anyone who wanted to sell or transfer a suppressor or a short-barreled rifle had to pay a $200 federal tax stamp on top of the sale price. That fee alone kept thousands of guns locked away in home safes because owners did not want to pay the tax twice, once when they bought the gun and again when they finally sold it. On January 1, 2026, that fee dropped from $200 all the way down to zero under a new federal law signed the year before. Suddenly, moving one of these regulated guns to a new owner cost nothing extra at all. Owners who had been sitting on suppressors and short rifles for years, waiting for the math to finally make sense, got their moment all at once. The result showed up immediately in federal records. Applications to transfer these guns hit numbers nobody had ever recorded before, with a single month early in the year passing 240,000 filings on its own, the largest number ever logged in one month. Across the first 4 months of the year, total applications passed 1 million, close to the entire previous year combined in just a matter of weeks. The agency handling these filings even saw its system slow down under the weight of so many people applying at once. Wealthy collectors did not need a dramatic reason to panic and sell everything overnight. They just needed a reason to finally act on a decision they had already been thinking about for years, and the government handed them that reason for free. Number 8. Storage and security costs are quietly draining bank accounts every single year, whether the guns get used or not. A serious custom collection does not sit in a bedroom closet behind a flimsy lock. It lives inside a real vault, often a room built specifically for that purpose, complete with fire suppression systems, humidity control to protect fine wood and steel, and a security system wired directly to a monitoring company that responds within minutes of any alarm. Add insurance riders that specifically cover engraved, one-of-a-kind, or hand-built firearms, and the yearly cost climbs into the thousands of dollars before a single shot is ever fired at a range. For a collector holding dozens of custom pieces, that bill adds up year after year, decade after decade, with no end in sight unless something changes. Appraisals need to be updated regularly too, since a collection that was valued 5 years ago rarely reflects what the market looks like today, and outdated numbers can leave an owner underinsured right when it matters most. A serious appraiser familiar with custom firearms is hard to find in most cities, which means owners often pay travel costs on top of the appraisal fee itself just to get an honest number written down on paper. Financial planners who work with wealthy clients have started treating large gun collections the same way they treat classic cars sitting untouched in a garage. These are assets that cost real money to protect and maintain, but do not generate any income of their own the way stocks or real estate can. When household budgets tighten or priorities shift toward assets that actually grow in value, expensive guns sitting in a vault are often the very first thing to go. Number 7 waitlists at the top custom gun makers have become a strange kind of pressure working against people who already own one. Builders like Wilson Combat and Nighthawk Custom take anywhere from 6 months to well over a year to finish a single handmade pistol from start to finish. Some of the most exclusive builders, the ones working with rare materials like Damascus steel, push past 18 months of waiting for just one gun that can carry a price tag well above $6,000 before any extra customization is even added. On the surface, that sounds like proof these guns are hot property and holding their value well. In reality, it creates a completely different problem for anyone trying to sell a used one. New buyers stepping onto these waitlists do not want somebody else's older custom build when they can order their very own from scratch, built exactly to fit their hand, their grip, and their personal taste down to the smallest detail. A used custom pistol, no matter how beautifully it was made or how many awards its maker has won, ends up competing against buyers who would honestly rather wait over a year for something built just for them from the ground up. Sellers are learning the hard way that a famous brand name does not always translate into fast resale value, especially when the pool of buyers willing to spend 6 figures on a used gun stays small to begin with, and even smaller once you narrow it down to buyers who want somebody else's exact specifications instead of their own. Number 6, political and legal exposure has become a personal risk that money alone cannot fully insure against anymore. Firearm makers and sellers have faced a wave of lawsuits in recent years, with juries in some cases handing down judgments well over $100 million against companies tied to a single gun sale that went badly wrong. Several states have also passed new laws in the last few years that make it easier to sue firearm sellers directly if their marketing or sales practices are found to cross a legal line, adding a whole new layer of risk that did not exist a decade ago. Wealthy individuals who sit on company boards, run public businesses, or answer to shareholders are watching these headlines closely and asking themselves a simple question. Is owning a large, visible firearms collection worth the reputational risk if something connected to it ever goes wrong, even indirectly and years down the road? Board members, executives, and other public-facing business owners face a very different calculation than an average private collector living out of the spotlight. A single news story linking their name to a firearm, even one they sold responsibly years earlier through proper legal channels, can create headaches that no lawyer can fully prevent once the story starts spreading online. For some of these owners, trimming down a large collection has less to do with the guns themselves, and much more to do with protecting their own name and their family's reputation going forward, especially heading into an election cycle or a major business deal where every headline gets extra scrutiny. Public relations teams working for wealthy families now sometimes get asked directly whether a client's private gun collection could ever become a liability if a deal, a campaign, or a partnership brings unwanted attention. That question alone, even without any lawsuit ever being filed, is often enough to convince a busy executive that a quiet sale beats a possible headache years down the road. Number 5. The auction market is sending a confusing signal right now, and the smartest sellers are reading it correctly before anyone else catches on. Some truly rare pieces are still breaking records at auction houses, with a trio of engraved and gold-inlaid English shotguns selling for well over $300,000 in a single sale earlier this year. But that kind of strength sits right at the very top of the market, among pieces that carry real documented history behind them, built by workshops with names going back well over a century. Everyday custom guns, the kind built by modern American shops rather than centuries-old European workshops, simply do not carry that same story or the same weight with serious buyers no matter how well they are made. Collectors paying top dollar at auction want provenance and a story to tell their friends, not just fine craftsmanship on its own sitting quietly in a case. A gun with no famous former owner, no historic event attached to its story, and no rarity beyond a high price tag competes in a much more crowded and far less forgiving corner of the market, often selling closer to what a private buyer would pay rather than the record-breaking numbers that grab headlines. Wealthy sellers who understand this gap clearly are choosing to move their pieces now, while demand for well-documented historic guns stays strong, instead of waiting around for a broader market that may never reward an ordinary modern custom, build the same way it rewards a 200-year-old name. Auction houses themselves are pushing this trend along, spending far more marketing effort on the handful of historic lots expected to break records than on the dozens of modern custom pieces filling out the rest of a catalog. A seller with a modern piece often gets a smaller spotlight, a shorter listing, and a lower reserve price recommendation, which pushes many owners to sell privately through a dealer instead of waiting months for an auction date that may not even highlight their gun. Number 4. Interest in truly custom builds is shifting fast toward younger buyers with completely different priorities than the generation before them. The people entering the high-end firearms world today often care far more about tactical performance, modular parts, and modern optics than they do about hand engraving and exotic wood grips passed down as a tradition from an older era. A pistol covered in gold inlay and fine hand scroll work might impress a collector from an older generation who grew up admiring that kind of quiet artistry passed down through gun-making families. A younger buyer with serious money to spend often wants something that performs flawlessly on a competition range instead, something built for function first, not something delicate meant to sit behind glass and never get touched or fired at all. This generational shift changes who actually wants to buy an older custom piece and what they are realistically willing to pay for it today, compared to what it may have sold for a decade earlier. Sellers holding on to decades-old custom collections are finding a noticeably smaller pool of buyers who share their same taste and appreciation for old-world craftsmanship, and many are adjusting their asking prices or their timelines to match a changing market instead of waiting indefinitely for buyers who may simply never show up the way they used to just a generation ago. Number 3. Diversification advice from wealth managers has quietly targeted physical collections of every kind, and firearms are no exception to that trend sweeping through private wealth management today. Financial advisors managing large portfolios increasingly push their clients to convert illiquid physical assets into investments that are easier to track, easier to value accurately, and easier to sell fast if the need ever comes up unexpectedly, whether that need is a business opportunity or simply a shift in family priorities. Guns fall into a strange and difficult category here. They hold real value, But pricing them accurately requires a specialist who understands the market inside and out. And finding a buyer willing to pay full value takes far more time than most owners ever expect going in, sometimes stretching across many months of waiting for the right offer to appear. Compare that slow process to stocks or index funds that sell within seconds at a known, published price visible to anyone with an internet connection. Advisors managing estates worth tens of millions of dollars are growing increasingly uncomfortable, watching clients hold 6 or 7 figures worth of firearms that cannot be priced or sold with anywhere near the same speed as almost everything else sitting in their portfolio. That quiet discomfort translates into private advice given behind closed doors during routine portfolio reviews. And advice from a trusted advisor who has managed a family's money for years often moves people faster than any headline or news story ever could hope to. Number 2, family dynamics inside wealthy households are shifting in ways that rarely make headlines but end up changing everything at home behind closed doors. Spouses and adult children increasingly do not share the same passion for firearms that originally built the collection in the first place. Decades earlier, a parent who spent 30 years carefully assembling custom pieces one at a time, learning every maker's story and every gun's history along the way, may find that their own children have no real interest in guns, hunting, or shooting sports at all, having grown up with entirely different hobbies and priorities. Rather than force an unwanted collection onto heirs who simply do not want it sitting in their own home someday, more owners are choosing to sell during their own lifetime, entirely on their own terms. While they can still personally guide the process, tell each piece's story to the next buyer, and negotiate a fair price for every single item. This approach avoids a rushed estate sale happening years later, handled by strangers with no personal connection to the guns and no real understanding of what each individual piece is actually worth to the right buyer who would appreciate it. It is a quieter, far more personal reason than a tax law or a lawsuit. But conversations with estate planners across the country suggest it has quietly become one of the most common reasons entire collections change hands today. Even more common than the financial reasons people usually assume come first. At the very top of this list sits the reason that ties every other factor together into one clear picture. Owning a serious custom firearms collection today demands more time, more paperwork, more security spending, and more legal awareness than it did even just 5 years ago, and that gap keeps widening every year. None of these pressures on their own would force a wealthy collector to suddenly sell everything overnight in a panic. But combined together, all at once, stacking on top of each other year after year, they completely change the entire calculation for anyone holding a large collection built over a lifetime. The tax change that made transfers free removed the last real financial excuse for holding on any longer, since the $200 fee that once justified waiting simply does not exist anymore. The estate planning risk removed the comfort of simply leaving the problem for later, once lawyers started explaining exactly what that mess would look like for grieving family members. The insurance and storage costs kept quietly adding up in the background year after year without pause, turning into real money over time that could be sitting somewhere else growing instead. And the shrinking overlap between older collections and newer buyer tastes made good timing feel more urgent than it ever has before, since waiting rarely improves a seller's position in a market that keeps moving toward younger buyers with different priorities. Wealthy collectors are not panicking, and they are not walking away from gun ownership as a whole, the way some headlines might suggest to a casual reader scrolling past. They are responding calmly and deliberately to a market and a legal landscape that changed faster than almost anyone expected it to just a few years ago, and they are choosing to sell on their own terms while they still fully can, rather than leaving that difficult decision to someone else later on down the road when they no longer have any say in it. That is the real story hiding behind the dramatic headlines, and it is playing out quietly in gun shops, law offices, and private phone calls across the entire country right now, today, while most people scrolling past never even notice it happening at all.